Settle in and do not look away. This entire story is a single chilling journey that is best experienced in full. If you appreciate tales of the supernatural, show your support by subscribing. It lets us know you want more. Now, listen closely. The Whispering Labyrinth of Aethel. Part 1. The Raven's Mark. My name is Elias Thorne, a historian specializing in obscure folklore and forgotten settlements. It was a brittle autumn afternoon when I first encountered the legend of Aethel. I was sifting through the dusty archives of a small Yorkshire library, chasing a fleeting reference in a local gazetteer to a village that had seemingly vanished from the map in the early 18th century. The entry was brief, almost dismissive. Aethel, a settlement of unknown origin, rumored to have been cursed and abandoned circa 1712. Local superstitions persist regarding the land. Local superstitions, I muttered to myself. The phrase a siren song to my academic curiosity. Most of my work involved debunking fanciful tales, but sometimes, just sometimes, the whispers held a kernel of something else. My initial research yielded little more than vague accounts of misfortune, sickness, and an overwhelming sense of dread that supposedly descended upon Aethel. There were whispers of strange sounds emanating from the surrounding woods, of livestock dying inexplicably, and of villagers succumbing to a wasting sickness the local physician couldn't diagnose. Then, the records simply stopped. Aethel ceased to exist in the documented history of the region. It wasn't until I stumbled upon a private collection of family papers tucked away in the library's forgotten annex that I found a more substantial clue. The papers belonged to a certain Reverend Silas Blackwood, who served as the vicar of a neighboring parish during Aethel's final years. His journal entries were filled with growing unease and a sense of impending doom concerning the ill-fated village. October 14th, 1711. The air around Aethel grows heavy, even from afar. The farmers who trade in market speak of a perpetual twilight clinging to the valley where it lies. Their eyes hold a haunted look, and their voices are hushed, as if afraid the very wind might carry their words to that cursed place. November 29th, 1711. I ventured closer to Aethel today, drawn by a morbid curiosity I could not deny. The path was overgrown, as if nature itself sought to reclaim the land. A silence hung in the air, more profound than any I have ever known. It was a silence that seemed to swallow sound itself. I saw no one, but felt as if I were being watched by unseen eyes. January 5th, 1712. A rider from Aethel reached my door this morning, his face pale with terror. He spoke of labyrinths appearing in the woods overnight, paths twisting and turning in ways no natural growth could explain. He claimed the very trees moved while they slept. He bore a mark upon his hand, a strange symbol that resembled a raven in flight, its wings contorted. He begged for holy intervention. But before I could offer solace, he fell into violent convulsions and died upon my doorstep. The raven mark remained, etched into his skin like a brand. February 18th, 1712. The reports worsen. Those who have fled Aethel speak of whispers on the wind, voices that call their names with chilling familiarity, even though they know no one in that forsaken place. They speak of being led astray by the twisting paths, finding themselves back at the edge of the village no matter how far they walk. The raven mark is appearing on others who have left, a sign, they fear, that Aethel's curse has followed them. The final entry concerning Aethel was dated March 10th, 1712. I can no longer ignore the pleas for help despite the palpable evil that clings to Aethel. I will journey there myself, armed with faith and scripture, to try and understand the darkness that has consumed this village. May God have mercy on us all. There were no further entries. Reverend Blackwood, it seemed, had vanished as completely as Aethel itself. Intrigued and increasingly unnerved, I decided to visit the location described in the old records. It was a remote valley, nestled within the North Yorkshire moors, a place even today considered somewhat isolated. As I drove along the winding country lanes, the landscape began to shift. The rolling green hills gave way to a more rugged terrain, the trees becoming gnarled and ancient, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers. An unnatural stillness settled over the air. The usual sounds of the countryside, birdsong, the rustling of leaves, strangely absent. I found the valley easily enough, a depression in the landscape that felt distinctly unerg from its surroundings. A sense of unease washed over me as I parked my car by a long-abandoned stone wall, the only discernible trace of human habitation. The air was cold, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic, like old blood. As I ventured into the valley, the woods grew thicker, the trees forming a dense canopy that blocked out most of the already weak sunlight. The ground underfoot was uneven, covered in moss and decaying leaves. It wasn't long before I noticed them. The paths. They were narrow and winding, seemingly leading nowhere in particular, often twisting back on themselves in illogical ways. It felt as if the very layout of the woods was designed to disorient. Then, I saw the mark. Scratched into the bark of an ancient oak, almost hidden beneath a layer of lichen, was the symbol from Reverend Blackwood's journal. The raven in flight, its wings disturbingly contorted. A shiver ran down my spine. This was more than just local superstition. As I continued deeper into the valley, the disorienting nature of the paths intensified. I tried to keep my bearings, using my compass and the position of the sun, but it was as if the very landscape was shifting around me. I would walk in what I believed to be a straight line, only to find myself back near where I had started. The silence remained, heavy and oppressive, amplifying the sound of my own breathing. Then, I began to hear them, faint whispers on the wind, barely audible at first, like the rustling of leaves. But as I pressed on, they grew clearer, more distinct. They seemed to be calling my name. Elias! The voice was soft, sibilant, and carried a chillingly familiar tone. Even though I knew I had never heard it before, it seemed to come from all directions at once, weaving through the trees. A chorus of unseen speakers. My heart pounded in my chest. This was Aethel's legacy, the whispers of its lost inhabitants, clinging to the very air. I knew then that I had stumbled into something far more profound and far more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. The local superstitions were not just stories, they were warnings. And I, in my academic hubris, had ignored them. Part 2. The Maze of Whispers. Days bled into nights as I became lost within the seemingly endless, whispering labyrinth of Aethel. The paths continued to twist and turn, leading me in circles, always preventing me from finding a way out of the valley. The whispers persisted, growing bolder, sometimes even forming coherent words, though they spoke in a language I did not recognize, a guttural tongue that sent shivers down my spine. Sleep offered no respite. My dreams were filled with shifting trees, contorted ravens, and faceless figures whispering in the darkness. I would wake up in a cold sweat, the lingering echo of the voices still in my ears. The physical manifestations of Aethel's curse also began to intensify. I found more of the raven marks etched into trees, carved into stones, even appearing as strange patterns in the moss. Once, I saw a flock of ravens circling overhead, their calls sounding strangely distorted, almost like mocking laughter. One of them broke away from the group and flew directly towards me, its eyes black and intelligent. As it passed over me, I felt a cold, invisible touch, and a sharp, burning sensation flared on the back of my hand. When I looked, the raven mark was there, newly formed, a chilling brand upon my skin. Food supplies dwindled and exhaustion began to take its toll. Yet a morbid fascination kept me moving, a desperate need to understand the mystery of Aethel, even as it threatened to consume me. One evening, as the last vestiges of twilight faded into an oppressive darkness, the whispers changed. They became clearer, and this time I understood them. They spoke in English, but their tone was laced with an ancient sorrow and a chilling sense of invitation. "Come closer, Elias. We have been waiting. Join us." Temptation warred with terror. A part of me, weary and lost, longed to succumb to the voices, to find solace in their haunting familiarity. But another part, the rational core of my being, screamed a warning. These were not friendly spirits. They were something else, something twisted and malevolent, drawing me deeper into Aethel's cursed embrace. Driven by a desperate need for answers, I began to follow the direction of the clearest whispers, hoping they might lead me to the heart of Aethel, to the source of its curse. The paths seemed to respond to my decision, the way ahead becoming slightly more defined, as if the labyrinth itself was guiding me. The trees began to thin, and I stumbled into a small clearing. In the center stood the ruins of what appeared to be a village. The crumbling foundations of stone houses, a collapsed well, and the skeletal remains of a small church, its steeple long gone. This had to be Aethel. A heavy mist clung to the ruins, swirling around the broken stones like spectral figures. The whispers were louder here, a constant chorus that filled the air. And then I saw them. They were not solid, not truly corporeal, but shimmering figures within the mist. Their forms vaguely human but distorted, their faces blurred and indistinct. They moved silently, gliding through the ruins, their sorrow palpable. These were the lost inhabitants of Aethel, trapped in an eternal echo of their cursed existence. As I stepped further into the clearing, one of the figures detached itself from the others and drifted towards me. It reached out a translucent hand, and the whispers around me intensified, their tone shifting from invitation to a mournful plea. "Help us. Break the cycle. Free us from Aethel." A flicker of pity, a sense of profound sadness for these trapped souls, washed over me. But there was something else in their whispers, a subtle undercurrent of something darker, something manipulative. Then I noticed something else in the clearing. In the center of the church ruins, partially buried beneath fallen stones, was a large, intricately carved stone. It was circular, and upon its surface was etched the same raven symbol I had seen countless times, but this one was larger, more elaborate, and seemed to pulse with a faint, dark energy. This, I instinctively knew, was the source, the heart of Aethel's curse. As I approached the stone, the spectral figures grew agitated, their whispers turning into frantic warnings. "Do not touch it. It will consume you. Flee Aethel while you still can." But the pull of the stone was too strong, an irresistible curiosity drawing me closer. I reached out my hand, my fingers trembling. As I touched the cold, carved surface, a jolt of energy surged through me, and the world dissolved into a cacophony of screams and swirling darkness. Part 3. The Heart of the Labyrinth. When I regained consciousness, the mist in the clearing had thickened, and the spectral figures were gone. The only sound was the frantic beating of my own heart, and a low, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the carved stone. The raven mark on my hand throbbed with a dull ache, and I felt a strange connection to the stone, as if a part of me had become intertwined with it. Images flashed through my mind, glimpses of Aethel's past, the arrival of a mysterious stranger bearing the carved stone, the villagers' initial curiosity turning to fear as strange events began to plague their lives. the construction of the labyrinthine paths in the woods, not by nature, but by unseen hands. The stone, I realized, was not merely a marker of the curse. It was a conduit, a focal point for a malevolent entity that had been drawn to Aethel centuries ago. The labyrinths were not meant to trap the villagers, but to contain something far more ancient and powerful. And by touching the stone, I had somehow weakened the barrier, allowing its influence to spread further. The whispers returned, but they were different now. They were no longer the mournful pleas of the trapped villagers. They were the voice of the entity itself, a cold, ancient consciousness that had been slumbering beneath the surface. "You have awakened me," the voice echoed in my mind, devoid of emotion, yet filled with an overwhelming sense of power. "The boundaries weaken." The ground beneath my feet began to tremble, and the ruins of Aethel seemed to groan under an unseen pressure. The trees around the clearing twisted and contorted, their branches reaching towards me like grasping claws. The air grew heavy, charged with a palpable sense of dread. I had to break the connection to the stone, to sever the link I had inadvertently forged, but as I tried to pull my hand away, I found that I was stuck. My fingers fused to the cold, carved surface. The humming intensified, and more images flooded my mind, visions of a vast, intricate labyrinth, stretching beyond the confines of the valley, a place of endless pathways and echoing whispers, a prison for something truly terrible. The entity spoke again, its voice closer now, as if it were inside my own head. "You will become part of the labyrinth, Elias Thorne. Your thoughts will become pathways. Your fears will become walls." Panic surged through me. I was being absorbed, becoming another part of Aethel's cursed landscape. I had to fight back, to find a way to resist the entity's growing power. Remembering Reverend Blackwood's journal, I tried to focus on faith, on scripture, on any sense of hope or divine intervention. But the entity mocked my efforts, its cold laughter echoing in my mind. "Your gods have abandoned this place long ago." Desperate, I tried to think of anything pure, anything untouched by the darkness. I thought of the beauty of the natural world, the intricate patterns of a spider's web, the delicate structure of a snowflake, the vastness of the starry sky. I focused on the joy of discovery, the thrill of understanding, the quiet satisfaction of uncovering a lost piece of history. The very things that had led me to Aethel in the first place. As I concentrated on these positive thoughts, a faint light began to emanate from my hand. Where it touched the stone, the humming faltered, and the entity's voice seemed to recede slightly. "What is this?" it whispered, a hint of confusion in its tone. Life, I thought, projecting my will with every fiber of my being, beauty, hope, things you can never touch. The light from my hand intensified, and I felt a surge of strength coursing through me. With a final desperate effort, I wrenched my hand free from the stone. The connection was broken, the humming stopped. The trembling ground stilled. The twisted trees slowly returned to their natural forms. The heavy sense of dread began to dissipate. The entity remained silent, its presence seemingly diminished. But I knew it was still there, lurking beneath the surface, weakened but not defeated. I had to leave Aethel to escape the labyrinth before the entity could regain its full power. But as I turned to flee, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The raven mark on my hand was no longer just a brand. It had begun to move, its lines shifting and contorting, growing larger, spreading across my skin like a living tattoo. The curse of Aethel was not just a place, it was becoming a part of me. Part 4. The Raven's Shadow. Leaving Aethel was not easy. The paths remained disorienting, as if the very woods themselves were reluctant to let me go. But with a renewed sense of urgency, driven by the creeping spread of the raven mark on my hand, I pressed on, using every bit of my knowledge of the terrain and my fading sense of direction. The whispers continued, fainter now, but laced with a new sense of anticipation, as if the entity knew that its hold on me was growing stronger.
You cannot escape, Elias. Aethel is within you now. The labyrinth awaits.
Days later, exhausted and delirious, I finally stumbled out of the valley and back to my car. The familiar sight of the modern world, the sounds of traffic in the distance, were a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere of Aethel. But the relief was short-lived. The raven mark on my hand was now a sprawling, intricate design that covered my entire forearm, its black lines seemingly pulsing beneath my skin. I returned home, seeking answers in ancient texts and folklore, desperate to understand the nature of the entity and the curse that now clung to me. I discovered that the raven was a recurring symbol in the legends of the region, often associated with trickery, ill omen, and entities that dwelled in liminal spaces, places between worlds. The carved stone, I learned, was likely a menhir, an ancient standing stone that had been used in pagan rituals, perhaps as a gateway or a conduit to other realms. The entity, drawn to this point of power, had corrupted it, turning Aethel into its own personal labyrinth. The curse, it seemed, was a slow assimilation, the entity gradually merging its consciousness with mine, turning me into another part of its twisted domain. The labyrinth of Aethel was not just a physical place, it was a mental construct, and it was now taking root within my own mind. Sleep became a battleground. My dreams were now fully consumed by the labyrinth, endless corridors of whispering shadows, with a contorted raven symbol appearing on every wall. I could feel the entity probing my thoughts, mapping the pathways of my consciousness, preparing to claim it as its own. I tried to fight back, to resist its influence, but the connection to the stone had weakened my will, leaving me vulnerable to its insidious whispers. My memories began to twist, my fears amplified, my sense of self slowly eroding. Then I remembered the spectral figures in the ruins, their mournful pleas for release. They were the previous victims of the entity, their minds trapped within the labyrinth, their identities fading into echoes. I knew that if I succumbed, I would become just like them, another lost soul wandering the endless pathways of Aethel. Desperate, I sought out anyone who might have knowledge of such ancient curses. I consulted with scholars of folklore, visited remote communities where old traditions still held sway, hoping to find a way to break the entity's hold on me. One elderly woman, a wise woman from a small village nestled deep in the moors, recognized the raven mark instantly, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and pity. "The raven's shadow," she whispered, a voice trembling. "An ancient thing, drawn to places where the veil between worlds is thin. It does not merely curse, it weaves. It creates its own reality, its own prison, from the minds of its victims. The labyrinth is not just a place, child. It is a state of being." She told me that the only way to fight the raven's shadow was from within, to confront it in the mental labyrinth it was creating within my own mind. It would be a perilous journey, she warned, for the entity would have ultimate control within its own domain. Armed with this knowledge, I prepared for the final confrontation. I knew that I had to enter the labyrinth of my own mind and sever the connection to Aethel before the raven's shadow consumed me completely. That night, as I lay in bed, the whispers growing louder, the raven mark on my arm pulsing with dark energy, I closed my eyes and allowed myself to be drawn into the labyrinth of Aethel, the twisted pathways of my own consciousness now merging with the cursed valley. The air was thick with mist and the shadows danced around me. The whispers were deafening, a chorus of voices seeking to confuse and disorient me. But this time, I was not lost. I was a visitor in my own mind, and I knew what I had to do. I began to walk, pushing through the swirling mist, ignoring the taunting whispers. I sought the heart of the labyrinth, the place where the entity resided, the nexus of its power within my mind. The paths twisted and turned, leading me through fragmented memories, amplified fears, and distorted perceptions. The raven symbol was everywhere, a constant reminder of the entity's presence. Finally, I reached a vast circular chamber. In the center floated the carved stone menhir from Aethel, pulsing with dark energy, and around it swirled a vortex of shadows, the form of a colossal raven beginning to coalesce within. This was the raven's shadow. It spoke, its voice echoing through the chamber, a chilling blend of all the whispers I had heard in Aethel. "You cannot defeat me, Elias Thorne. This is my domain now. You are already lost." But I refused to succumb to its fear-mongering. I focused on the memories of beauty and joy, the pure moments of discovery that the entity could not comprehend. I projected these images outwards, using them as a shield against the encroaching darkness. The light began to emanate from the raven mark on my arm, no longer a symbol of the curse but a beacon of resistance. It spread through the chamber, pushing back the shadows, weakening the entity's form. With a final surge of will, I focused all my remaining strength on severing the connection between the stone and my mind. I pictured the menhir cracking, the dark energy dissipating, the labyrinth within me beginning to unravel. The raven's shadow shrieked, a sound of pure rage and pain, as its form flickered and began to dissolve. The chamber trembled, and the whispers faded into silence. Then, there was only darkness. Part 5. The Lingering Echo. I awoke in my bed, the first rays of dawn filtering through the window. The raven mark on my arm was gone, my skin smooth and unmarked. The oppressive feeling that had clung to me since leaving Aethel had lifted. I had faced the raven's shadow within the labyrinth of my own mind, and, somehow, survived. But Aethel was not forgotten. The memories of the whispering woods, the spectral figures, the cold dread of the entity, remained vivid in my mind. I knew that the raven's shadow was not truly gone, merely weakened, its connection to me severed. It still lurked within the valley, waiting for another vulnerable soul to stumble into its domain. I never spoke publicly about my experience. Who would believe such a tale? My academic work shifted, however. I became less interested in dusty archives and more focused on the power of belief, the lingering influence of forgotten places, the subtle ways in which the past can imprint itself upon the present. Sometimes, when the wind howls outside my window, I think I can still hear faint whispers on the breeze, a chilling echo of Aethel. And I often find myself glancing at my arm, half expecting to see the return of the raven's mark. The valley where Aethel once stood remains marked on no maps, a forgotten place shrouded in local superstition. Few venture there, and those who do speak of a palpable sense of unease, a feeling of being watched by unseen eyes.
I know the truth.
The labyrinth still exists, woven into the fabric of the land, a silent testament to the ancient entity that slumbers within. And somewhere, in the echoing pathways of Aethel, the raven's shadow waits, its patience as endless as the twisting parts of its domain, forever seeking to draw new souls into its whispering embrace. The curse of Aethel is not a tale of the past, it is a lingering echo, a shadow that stretches across time, a reminder that some places are best left undisturbed, their secrets forever locked within their labyrinthine depths.
Thanks for watching to the end. We've got plenty more exciting videos coming your way, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out.